So now I'm going to get into why Steve and I are no longer on speaking terms. We've cut off all communication, and I will be seeing him in court in a few months. What's up, guys? So today we are going to talk about my coaching with Revive Stronger, specifically Steve Hall. It's been a long time coming, 6 months of coaching with Steve. So we're going to get into why I decided to do coaching with him, how the results were, what we did, what we might do going forward. Last year, I was sitting at about 197, 198. I knew I had a beach trip coming up, decided to cut down to 190. It's a pretty easy cut for me. So because it was so easy, I was like, well, let's just keep going. And I decided to get as low as I did in 2020, which was down to about 181. I figured, well, I'm looking for something to do. Anybody who's been listening to the channel for a long time knows that I've been doing this for a very long time, probably about 16 years extremely seriously, and then maybe 2 years before that, a little bit less seriously. So 16 to 18 years, not a lot left to do at this point. So, I figured, okay, if nothing else, it's just going to be something fun to try. Obviously, I've talked to Steve a lot over the last 3 years or so since starting the podcast. I've had him on the channel probably 7 or 8 times. I'm very familiar with his methods, and so I figured why not just get it from him directly and see how it goes, and then we can kind of report on it. So I basically said to Steve, okay, this is going to be a 100% hypertrophy-focused routine. I think some people think that I'm mostly about strength or something like that, and the reality is I've had a lot of purely hypertrophy-focused work in the past. But I told him this is going to be all that we're going to be focusing on. If you want me to be training 7 days a week, if you want me to be training with 2-a-days, we can do that. Whatever you want, we're going to do it nutritionally, everything. Because one, I wanted to see, is there possibly anything left that I haven't already gotten as far as muscle growth? But two, because I didn't want anybody to be able to come back and say afterwards, one way or the other, that I didn't give it my all, or we don't really know for sure. I said, whatever you want to do, we're going to put 100% effort into it. Start off with measurements, my weigh-in, of course, what the goals were. He developed a routine for me, which was 5 days per week, which I will outline here. I'll just throw in a picture of kind of generally what we were doing, as well as the number of sets we were doing, because I think a lot of people assume that they kind of associate Mike Israetel and Renaissance Periodization with Steve Hall and Revive Stronger. And I think that initially that was kind of the case, but I think in recent years, he's kind of branched off a little bit to his own thing. And that was actually one of my biggest surprises. If you see the document here, you'll see that the changes in volume from week to week in the mesocycle really weren't that significant. Some people are thinking you're gonna like triple your sets throughout, and that really was not the case. So he laid out the plan here, and we gauged, how do I feel week to week? We talked about pump, disruption, readiness going into a set. So we're gonna get into like his methodology there as well. Now, as I mentioned, there is that association between Mike and Steve, of course. They're close. He's been on the channel of Steve a million times at this point. So I had Mike on my podcast about 7 months ago, and I said, hey, I'm gonna be doing this coaching. So we talked about it, and he said, well, you're gonna be able to get all new gains when you do this. And when he ramps up your volume, you're gonna see this and that. So I'll include that clip here.
Basically, when Steve starts to gently ramp your volumes or auto-regulatorily ramp your volumes, then you'll probably see some pretty cool gains. And then if you take another 2 months of low volume, you will see another spate of good gains again. But the 2 years, I don't think affords you any more of a rebound. But 2 months even is a long time for many people who never do back away from volume that long. And then you can get pretty good gains, very likely. New gains, not just regaining the old stuff by backing off for a while and then coming back. I just would caution people as to think, oh man.
So that's kind of what our starting point was okay, here we go. I just finished a cut. I should be primed for some growth. Let's see if we can beat what I used to have. Now, this is a very important point, because a lot of times people say, well, couldn't you have grown a little bit more? Or don't you think you could gain more muscle or strength if you did this? And my biggest point that I always make, and Steve fully agrees with me on this, is that it doesn't matter if I can gain strength and size just on an absolute level. It matters if I can do it and beat what I used to have, and or have more muscle at the same body fat. So I could gain 20 pounds of lean body mass if I ate my way up to 280 pounds. I'd probably gain more than 20 pounds of lean body mass. The point is, at a given body fat percentage, are you a better version of yourself? Do you have more muscle at that same body fat percentage, or at a given weight, do you have more muscle and less fat? And Steve and I agreed on that. We said, okay, we're going to maybe bulk me up from 181 to 195 or so. And the goal is to beat the previous 195 of the former year. Is we basically just set the calories to be at a level that would have me gain at about half a pound to 1 pound per week. And I will say up front that that's pretty much exactly what we were doing. So again, over 6 months, you're looking at about 26 weeks. So at half a pound per week, you're looking at 13 pounds of weight gain, and it gained about 14 pounds. So it was exactly what we wanted to do with that. I'd say one point that Steve had mentioned a few times, and I think we kind of just disagree on the importance of this, but he even said it wasn't really much of a factor, was that he said, sometimes my calories were more up and down and he likes just like a steady surplus. However, I always stayed in the range he said. So he said, if it's plus or minus 10 to 20% on a given day, that's fine, as long as we're hitting the calorie goals. And I pretty much always hit the calorie goals. I always hit the sleep goals. So we wanted at least 8 hours of sleep per night, or that's what we'd shoot for. And probably 95% of days I hit that. And then every once in a while, there'd be a 7-hour night. I'm not somebody who gets 3 to 4 hours of sleep a couple of times per week or anything like that. I'm very consistent with my sleep and my schedules. And as far as the calories, like I said, I was in a slight surplus throughout, but there were days where instead of maybe having 3,200 all week, it might have been 3,600 one day, 2,800 one day. And then, but on average, I was hitting that surplus. Now, one thing I would say is that when we started, I sent him my form videos of pretty much every exercise. And he actually made a comment that he was surprised at how good the form looked. And I think that may be understandable because I think people think of some of the videos that maybe I post on Instagram and they'll see this like all out PR, it's like the best pull-ups I've ever done, right? If you just look at the actual numbers, 100 pounds attached to me for 6 reps. Obviously, it's not going to be always pristine form if I'm going for max reps or like a max lift. But the vast majority of what I do and have always done with lifting is to keep the form pretty controlled, full range of motion, always full range of motion. But again, maybe on like a max bench press, I'm just seeing how many reps I can get. But the vast majority of my sets are done with good form. And this is something that he commented on as well. I would also note that something that is always humbling when you really slow things down, because I went from just good form to very slow and controlled, is of course we've all had that experience where you find that you have to use so much less weight than you're used to. And you find that not necessarily that it's even better or worse, but just that you can make a certain lighter weight much harder. But this was something that I've seen Jeffrey Verity Schofield talk about, and I've talked about as well, that when you are keeping a constant form and when you are stopping shy of failure like this, sets feel different. So what I mean by that is if you are used to, let's say, swinging on laterals, right? Then in a normal set for you, your true 1 RAR might be like when you have 4 reps left of your form. So for example, maybe you get up to here and it's like a true 1 RAR, but then to continue the set, you start to use some momentum. What I'm saying is that when you're used to the feeling of, oh, I actually would do 4 more reps here, you can actually only get 1 because you didn't want any sort of like swinging or anything like that. You actually end up stopping a set earlier, which is kind of where I would maybe defend somebody like Mike Israetel a little bit more. I know some people were saying that he wasn't really training close to failure, but I think when you're used to, again, like pausing, let's say the last few reps, a lot of people, okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you go, okay, 9, 10. And then, maybe you do that one more time, you get 11. Well, really, it was around 8 that you were at a 1 RIR, but you kept extending that. So I really tried to not do that at all. I tried to stick to whatever RIR prescriptions he gave me. So we started with like week 1, 4 RIR, and then 3 RIR, and then 2 RIR, and then 1. So I would find that, some of these sets were still quite difficult, even though they're 3 RIR, because I'm not allowing myself to continue to go beyond that. And then you would find that all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I could keep going with how I'm used to pushing, but I cannot keep going with pristine form to an actual 1 RAR. So then the form would just stop, or the set would just stop. Oh, what did I find beneficial? What were some of the pros of this? Well, for one, I found it just something that was enjoyable. It was different. I literally was doing the exact same routine for 2 years prior to this, and just maintaining. I would get a random thing here and there. Like I set a pull-up PR randomly kind of one day. I hit a bench press PR. Like I've hit PRs in the last 2 years, lifetime PRs, but it was so rare. And this was like something completely new that I was like, okay, this could be fun to do. And it got me excited for it. And that itself, I said to Steve early on, even if I got no results, that is a significant benefit. That's great. It's nice to actually be looking forward to training again. Another thing I guess you could say as a pro is that frankly, the workouts were easier. You know, I used to do 3 workouts a week, so each of those was very hard, mostly compound exercises, very intense. And here I was doing a lot of machine exercises, right? I mean, is a reverse grip, close grip bench press harder, or is a tricep push down to a 3 RAR harder? I mean, obviously the latter is going to be an easier workout. So they were higher volume on the whole, but the actual workouts themselves, I would say, were easier to complete. You can go into the workout thinking like, you know, this is going to be hard, but it's not going to absolutely kill me. Another thing was that we did add more volume to lower body. And I can say that with the last maybe 3 years or so, because of some concerns I've had, I've decided to kind of back off on leg training as much. My legs did not really shrink, but they probably did just to an extent. And I got that growth back within a short period of time with Steve, where we went from 1 day a week to 2 days a week of lower body training and significantly higher volume. So that was a pro too, to get that growth back. And it almost makes you wonder sometimes like, well, if you can maintain or even grow with this 2 to 3 RAR, why not do it? Why not have half of your workouts be 2 or 3 reps shy of failure if studies and anecdotes show that it's going to be just as effective? I think maybe one reason not to is because it makes it harder to always be consistent and judge one workout to the next. But I also think you'd have to gauge the volume with that. You know, just because I didn't shrink with 3 or 4 RAR with this much volume doesn't mean that I could get away with doing 3 to 4 RAR sets with my former volume, where I was only doing 6 to 8 sets per week. Maybe in that case, I really would need to push very close to failure because the volume is lower. But on the whole, like I said, the main thing for me was that it was something that got me excited, and enjoyable workouts was just a nice break, I guess, from what I was doing before. All right, so now I'm going to get into why Steve and I are no longer on speaking terms. We've cut off all communication, and I will be seeing him in court in a few months. Obviously kidding, because Steve is a lovable guy. Everybody likes Steve. It's kind of hard not to like the guy. You know, he's always very chipper and always has a good attitude about things. So very much like Steve, but I will go into here some of the things that I thought were, I don't know if I would even necessarily call them all cons, but things that I thought maybe were negatives or things I did not enjoy as much. So for one, it is a ton to record. Now, I am somebody who is super analytical, super OCD with numbers. I have records literally of any day, just about, probably about 98% of days in the last 15 plus years. I could tell you what I ate because I've logged it on FitDay, and I just like to have the numbers. I have Excel sheets that show my weight, calories, and other things for the last several years. It's something that I just like to have the numbers. I like to see trends, and that's just kind of how my mind works. I've logged every workout I've pretty much ever done. Even if it's not something I'm on vacation, I'll at least write generally what I did. And with that said, this was still a lot even for me, because now, in addition to doing all of that tracking that I already do, I was having to track daily weights for him, the time that I weighed in, the calories that I ate. At one point we were tracking steps as well, my sleep, and any notes that I had. Then all of my workouts, weight, time, sets, and reps, and all of that, and the exercise, as well as my daily readiness, my pump, and my disruption for every exercise, which is an incredible amount to log. And honestly, one of the biggest barriers I find with clients is getting them to just even track calories or even just do some of these basic things. Now, my clientele is different than Steve. Steve mostly works with serious lifters and bodybuilders. I work with largely Gen Pop people, and all the way up until advanced trainees, but not necessarily people who want to compete, people who want to be at this long-term and see sustainable results over a significant period of time. But my point is, unless you are really serious, and again, I don't know too many people who are as analytical with this stuff as I am, I just think it's almost like a barrier to entry. Now, obviously, Steve could accommodate that. I'm not saying that Steve would tell somebody, no, you have to do this, or I'm not going to train you. Not at all. But I'm saying if you were actually to do all of the things that he wanted you to list, it's a ton. And it's not something like, I mean, at some point, even I was like, man, I'm like a workout is taking me significantly longer because it's not just a workout now. It's like all the logging I had to do. It was a lot. And so I think that is something that I'm looking forward to not doing as much, or basically just going back to what I was previously doing, which is still a lot. And most people don't even do that much. But that was significant in my mind, and I think would maybe turn some people off unless they were very serious. And even Steve had mentioned to me himself that when it comes to some things like calves or forearms or maybe abs, he doesn't even track those because I think he even mentioned for the same reason. It's not really worth it. At some point, it's almost just like makes you less likely to even want to do it in the first place. I think another thing for me as a con, and again, this is totally based on just my life situation, was that 5 workouts per week, in addition to I was doing like 2 days of cardio, and that was just something I wanted to do for health reasons, was a lot as well. So I have a very busy schedule right now. For instance, my Mondays, I work from 7:30 in the morning until 8:30 at night, and then I'm up early Tuesdays to work again. So I have a very busy schedule, and that again is nothing against Steve. I said, I want you to tell me exactly what you want me to do, and I will do it. And I just cut out other things to make it work, right? I wasn't as social, but I wanted to make sure I still gave it 100%. So I did that, but it was a lot. I found that, people would want to maybe go out midweek or even on the weekend, and I had a hard time doing that. I had to turn some things down, which is not something I usually like to do at this point in my life. I like to be able to say yes to opportunities. And on the weekends, so I was working out Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I'm working out Friday and Saturday and Sunday. So if I want to go anywhere, I really almost can't unless they have a gym, and then it's a different comparison. It's new equipment. There was one weekend where I just told them we scheduled it on a deload week. So I just took off the Friday, Saturday, Sunday because I was away for the whole weekend. So we could kind of work that out. But I'm just saying in general, it was harder to have a normal social life, but that's nothing against Steve. That's just something that I personally didn't like about it. And then a final point as far as something that I didn't love / maybe disagreed with is the utility of very high volume and a pump. Now, this was not very high volume, but I'm just saying in general, I don't think I get a ton out of high volume. And I don't think there's a ton of utility in the pump beyond an indicator of what muscle group you're working. So, we have a lot of evidence to suggest that whether it's high reps or low reps, for the most part, as long as volume is equated, you're gonna get similar growth. And yet, if you're looking at what gives you the best pump, to me, the pump is almost entirely dependent on the rep range and if I'm like really squeezing that muscle and how close I am to failure. So I don't at all believe that if you did multiple sets of 30 versus multiple sets of 8, that the multiple sets of 30 is going to be so superior for growth. And yet all of us would experience a much greater pump. So do I think you should feel a pump in the muscle that you're working? Yes, you should feel that that muscle is actually working. And the same thing with soreness. Do I think soreness is a useful indicator of growth? No, but it does tell you what muscle is probably being worked, right? Or has been worked in the last day or two or whatever. So I think that there is some utility, but it's not something that I would personally tell clients you got to track and wow, you got a really good pump. That's fantastic. One of the things I said to Steve was when I was done some of my workouts, my pump was the most I've ever seen it. And I looked like the most pumped up in the mirror post-workout. And he, in his mind, that was really good news. And I personally just don't think that's really good news if my unpumped self looks exactly the same. It's great to get a pump, but personally, I just don't think that alone indicates growth. And I'm not trying to overemphasize what Steve believes about the pump too. It's one of many factors. I just think that we disagree on the importance of it. And then as far as volume, again, just past a certain point, I just personally don't seem to notice much. And I've seen a lot of clients who tell me that they were kind of obsessed with the Renaissance periodization method of things and all this ramping volume and very high volume. And they then switched to maybe more of like a power building approach and not even obviously like a bodybuilding approach would be better for growth than a power building approach, but it depends on how you define power building. I guess what I would say is that when they cut back to a lower to moderate volume, they seem to have good responses. And I know the studies will say one thing, and I like to follow the evidence as much as possible, but obviously we have some studies that recommend things that, or would conclude to recommend things that we would never recommend. Obviously, the Schoenfeld study with the 45 sets to failure is the one that everybody brings up. It's like, well, in this study, you would think this, but almost nobody was actually buying into that, right? Almost everybody, it seems universally at this point, thinks something was up with that study because nobody would actually recommend 45 sets per week for almost any situation, right? So I understand the studies generally trend towards higher volume, but of course the individual data points in those studies show that some people responded better to lower volume. Maybe that's just me. I can tell you that, I haven't done a lateral raise in years. We added a ton of laterals and shoulder work in general. And I'll throw in a picture here of the left side picture is me now, and the right side picture is me last year. And you guys can tell me if you think that the 17 sets or whatever for shoulders and all the extra laterals did anything. Because I would say that in this picture, and just from what I'm seeing, they didn't do anything. And I know there are others who very rarely do much of laterals at all. And again, it's what is my personal experience. That's all I'm sharing here. All right, so going into some of the conclusions, which I still know there's going to be plenty left to talk about in this video. I think the biggest thing that I've thought throughout this is that, there's some people who will say, and even Steve had said this before, he was like, well, maybe it's just not worth it for you at this point to put in that extra effort, right? Or what's commonly said is like, well, it's not worth it. The results that you get are no longer worth the effort required to get those results, And I mean, there was an example I brought up several times. I was on a podcast with Abel Chabai a little while ago, actually now probably over a year ago. And I was asked, well, is it worth it for you? Like if you could do, put on 3 pounds of muscle or something like that in the next year, would that be worth it if you had to do this, and this workout? And I was almost shocked by the question because I was like, maybe people think that I'm some minimalist who just doesn't think those things are worth it. And that could not be farther from the truth. I have done everything conceivable that would not dramatically harm my health to gain muscle over the last 16 plus years. I've tried every legal supplement. I've tried every workout there is. I've tried every nutritional approach. I mean, I don't know almost anybody who's tried as many things as I have tried over the years. And if you told me that I had to work out 7 days a week to gain 1 pound of muscle every year for the next 5 years, so that 5 years from now I had a total of 5 pounds more muscle, I would 100% say that that is worth it for me because progress and muscle growth is really important for me. So there's kind of this false narrative that some people, like I've heard Layne Norton say before, is like, this was back when he was still pushing his BCAA supplement, which I think finally he's kind of recognized has no utility really. I mean, unless you're literally just not eating protein. But he would say, does the average person need it? Well, first it was like BCAAs are great. And then all this evidence came out that BCAAs really weren't great. And then it was like, well, okay, maybe they're not great, but if you're just that person who wants that last 1 or 2%, then, I think you should do it. And hey, if you're a weekend warrior, don't worry about it. But if you're serious about this is what you'll do. And I hate that attitude. I'm not saying I hate Layne Norton. Actually, I like Layne Norton, but I'm just saying that attitude of, well, if you're just a weekend warrior, it doesn't matter. But if you're serious, you're going to do all this. And to me, that is total BS. Now, there are examples of that, right? I think there's an extreme and there is a level that's totally fine for the weekend warrior. But people use that example and then say this being whatever that extreme thing is actually really necessary. So for instance, maybe they would say you need to work out 6 days a week. You need to ramp up your volume from here to here. And again, I think that is absolutely a false narrative and almost demonstrably so. The reality is in life, there is a point where you will stop progressing in almost anything. Look at athletics in general. Most athletes have a peak in their 30s, right? In tennis, by the time you're 35, you're really going downhill. In MMA, it's probably about that, again, on average, right? Sure, there's a Tom Brady out there, but for every Tom Brady, there's 20 other examples of people who will start to decline before that, right? I mean, in football, you're old by 30 for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of examples like that, right? Gymnastics, obviously, even younger. So bodybuilding, we're actually really fortunate that you can continue to gain muscle. For a lot of people, it really is up until their mid-30s, depending on when they got started. If you got started at 28, sure, you can probably gain muscle until you're 40. If you got started at 12, you're not really going to be putting on true new muscle at 40 years old, but it's something that you don't necessarily decline like you do with other sports, and that's fantastic. But it is just a normal thing that at some point you're going to stop growing. And I was going to say for some reason, but it's kind of a clear reason that people don't want to accept that sometimes progress is just going to stop, right? I mean, if you look at one of the original fitness YouTubers, Scooby, he has a video demonstrating that he, even on TRT, it could not stop the decline that he experienced with age. Now, I'm nowhere near Scooby's age. I'm not saying I'm declining, but I am saying that after 18 years, it's reasonable to expect that you wouldn't see much. And that was one of the biggest things that Steve and I talked about. Is like, look, after 6 months, the reason we chose 6 months is that's like really the amount that we could say if progress was happening, it was tangible. 3 months is like the very minimum, maybe 4, 5, 6. But I mean, close to 9 months, you're looking at like a normal bodybuilder's off season, right? If they're competing yearly. So 6 months was a good amount of time to say, could we see anything different? But we agree that, at this much time, you can't expect to see dramatic changes. And I was saying like, look, I've taken my arm measurements literally thousands of times over my life. Like since I was 13, 14 years old, I've taken my arm measurements probably on average once a week, several times per session to make sure I got it right. It's something that waistline, calipers, I've done thousands of times. So it's something I'm very consistent with, and I will do it and I'll get the same measurement within like a 16th of an inch. So it's something that I feel very confident. Now, some people are not as good at it, but for me, it's something I'm very confident that I'm consistent with. So we said, okay, if I'm the same weight and my arms are even 1/8 of an inch bigger, I'll be really happy. If I'm the same weight, but my waistline is even 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch smaller, if my calipers are a little smaller, if my strength's a little bit better, that's fantastic. And we kind of agreed on that as like an end point there. But I just want to say, like, I just want to make it clear that in no way were we expecting anything super dramatic. And that wouldn't be fair to assess his coaching like that, right? I mean, obviously he's had plenty of clients with fantastic results. So we had to be realistic in what we're expecting here. So, and generally speaking, I really don't trust most people's assessment of themselves as far as where they're growing. So I'm going to give a few examples here. So I had a friend, Russell, in college, and he was doing 5-3-1. And he would always say, man, like this routine is like, I'm crushing it. New PRs today. And it was always such bullshit. So I always had to ask him. I would say, so what did you do today? What was the actual lift? And when I'd actually get him to tell me the weight, it was either a completely different exercise or it was something that I knew he did even a year prior. And it was like, I wasn't trying to be a jerk. It was more just constantly hearing about these PRs he was setting. And it was nonsense. Another guy who I like a lot, so I won't call him out by name, but I sent him a picture and it was when he was 205. And he said, man, like I'm 205 now, but it's crazy. Like I am like, so much bigger now. And I'm not going to burst his bubble, but I'm like, so much bigger. You're the same weight. It's a year later. You look almost exactly the same. It's an interesting perception that some people have. Doug Brignoli was on a podcast recently. I think it was with Mike Israetel. And he was talking about how, once he started doing these high reps, he was growing like a weed at 60 plus years old. And I'm like, you're telling me you've been competing and training for 30 plus years. You're 60 plus years old right now, but you're growing like a weed by switching to high reps. And it's almost like this thing, it's something Abel has said before, where it's like people almost like they turn to a robot. They just like, there's like these little like trite things that they say. And it's like, do you actually step back and hear what you're saying? Because a lot of the times it's just something that I wouldn't put any stock in. Now, I know some people will say, well, they'll look at what factors for progress. And to me, the factors that are really going to matter are basically what I touched on, which is like, again, you're going to take your weight, waistline, arm measurements, like muscular measurements in general, your calipers, the weights you're using in the gym, and pictures, right? Now, why? Because most of these are pretty objective. I've heard some people say that like how your pants are fitting, or, if somebody made a comment to you, or they'll even just go off memory, which is so flawed because we've all probably had this experience where you're bulking up, then you're cutting down, and you think to yourself, well, wow, like I'm looking so lean. I don't know if I've ever looked this lean before. But then you can go back at an old picture and you're like, and this has happened to me several times, you look at an old picture and you're like, oh, this is exactly how I looked before. So I really like to use objective measurements, because if I'm doing 45-pound curls with strict form for 12 reps, and then next year at the same body fat, at the same weight, I'm doing 45 pounds for 12 reps with strict form, I can almost guarantee that I haven't gained any muscle on my bicep, because if I did, I would be able to generate more force and I'd be stronger, right? And if that's the same across lifts, then I'm pretty sure that I didn't gain muscle. So those are proxies that I think are really valuable. If you're saying like, I've heard people say, oh, well, somebody was saying I'm looking bigger. Like that means literally nothing to me. I also find it ironic that some of the people who say measurements aren't really going to be that great or consistent are using pictures, which we've seen hundreds of examples of people who you change the slightest thing with the angle or the slightest thing with the lighting, or you were a little bit later after a workout, or you didn't have as many carbs the day before, and the pictures look dramatically different. I mean, I've taken them from one day to the next, and we've all seen these that are so different. So it's not that I don't think pictures are valuable. I think pictures are extremely valuable while dieting to see that you're getting leaner. But are they gonna detect a half a pound of muscle growth? Certainly not, right? Distributed throughout your entire body, even if you gained 2 pounds of muscle, you might not notice that at all in pictures unless you are contest lean. So while I did take pictures, those were largely just for Steve and I to kind of assess, but it's not to me going to be as telling as, hey, I can now do 2 more reps with the same weight at the same body weight, and it's an exercise that I've been doing for years, which is another thing I should probably talk about, which is that a lot of the progress made in the weight room was new exercises. So of course, as we talked about many times, you have this neurological adaptation. Frankly, like 90% of the exercises he had me doing were new exercises, but the ones that were, when I actually compared to last year, they were no stronger. So they weren't weaker, but they were no stronger. So to me, that and some of the pictures I took along with the measurements, which I'll get into, kind of showed that nothing really happened. So, and I really don't mean to be so negative here. It's just, I really try to be as objective as possible. And when I see so many examples of people who are led by emotions, or they don't want to believe that something that is happening, I just think it's a little bit almost not dishonest to the listeners, like they're purposely doing that, but you're leading people to believe that something is happening that's not. And so even if you're not purposely dishonest, I think it is an example where it's really not good for the listeners to be misled. And then there are counter examples like Steve Hall, who actually made amazing progress. And that was one of the reasons that I was almost more inclined to be coached by him. You know, we're all influenced by what we see, right? And seeing him make fantastic progress. Now, keep in mind, he was not 15 plus years into it. Steve was probably about 7 or 8 years in the last time he competed. And now I think he's about 11 years in. So most people would agree that at 7 years in, you could still make fantastic progress. And Steve did. I mean, he really made some tremendous progress. So a lot of the quote unquote negatives that I'm talking about here have nothing to do with anything negative with Steve Hall's coaching. It's more, I almost feel like there has to be something to be said for this mindset that's out there that you're just going to progress forever, because that wouldn't be fair to assess somebody's coaching on. If anything, I'm more defending the coaching with Steve because I feel like personally it was a very positive experience. Steve is absolutely still somebody who I put in my recommended coaches list. You know, if I get too filled with clients, I have a number of people who I say, look, I can't coach you right now, but here's people I trust and here's people I think you'd get good results with. Steve Hall has been on that list for a long time, and he'll continue to be on that list for a long time, in large part because not only do I think he knows what he's doing, but he's also a good guy who's going to look out. I mean, you know, I would look forward to getting weekly updates from Steve and just talking with him about it. Now, obviously, I'm a little closer with Steve than maybe like a random client would be because we've known each other for 3 years now, but I'm just saying, he's somebody who I think is going to get you results if you still have results left to achieve. So as a conclusion, so what were the results? You know, what happened? I got back up to 195, 196. Did I see anything? Basically, almost every week I would have a weight, a waistline, my flexed arm measurements, and my calipers. So chest, abdomen, and thigh for the skin folds. And I looked at, right now, I think for my actual weigh-in, I was about 193. So I looked at last year when I was like 191 and 195, and then I found some more exact weights. And across the board, my arms were like to the 16th of an inch, exactly the same. My calipers were basically exactly the same. I think my chest was like 0.5 millimeters on average higher, and abdomen was like 0.5 millimeters lower. I mean, essentially identical. Pictures looked identical. Actually, I think, I mean, even Steve agreed. So I sent Steve the pictures. I didn't want him to be so biased. So I put the before pictures after and the after pictures before. And even he said, you know, the pictures from last year looked a little bit better. You know, maybe my shoulders and my chest looked a little bit rounder and things like that. Now, does that mean that I actually got worse? I don't think so. But the point is, even Steve agreed that if you look at these pictures, you know, it's very hard to judge much, but it certainly wasn't better now. And then I've already touched on strength being pretty much identical. And I think it goes without saying that obviously my calves did not grow, which this was despite going from, you know, I think 6 sets before, up to as high as I think like 15 sets per week. And I've continued to, some of you know I've done this calf experiment where I've not worked my left calf in over 2 years now. It's probably closer to 3 years now. My left and right calf are exactly the same size. So maybe some people will respond to direct calf training, but I'm going on 3 years not training my left calf, and they are exactly the same size. And that is with every calf technique you could think of under the sun, literally over a dozen different specialization routines for it. It's just not in the cards, and I've accepted it. So, when we look at the actual strength, like I said, that was very similar. Actually, it was basically identical. I even specifically, when I took the pictures, I went back to the workout that I had done last year when I took those pictures, and I did the exact same workout. I hit the exact same reps, and then I went and right away took the post-workout pictures. So truly, as nearly identical situations as I could make it, down to the shorts and beater that I had on in the pictures. I mean, it was literally, I wanted to have it as exact as possible, same bathroom, same everything. And that was the conclusion. So that's where I decided, okay, well, we've done 6 months, nothing really happened. To be honest, I could kind of tell by about 4 or 5 months that nothing was really happening, but he had some little tricks and things he wanted to pull out, and they were fun. So I wanted to try it and make sure we went to that at least 6 month mark. But at that point, I could conclude, all right, well, we've gone from 3 days a week to 5 days a week. We've gone from 6 to 8 working sets per muscle group to as high as like 15 for some of them, and nothing changed. But do not conclude from that means both programs are equal in terms of getting to your potential, because we all know that it is much easier to maintain than it is to grow. So all that we can really conclude from this is that once you've hit this max, or basically, roughly whatever a max would be, if you want to call it a lifestyle max, if maybe under ideal circumstances, you could gain half a pound more muscle, but let's just call it a max. Once you've hit that point, maybe one routine would get you there much faster. But once you're here, jumping back into this super higher volume thing wasn't going to do anything. So I look back at like what I was doing before, and honestly, it's pretty low, even lower than I would actually recommend to a client when I look at how low volume some of the stuff I was doing was. But yet we did the experiment. We actually did it. We doubled the volume almost. We made sure that I was like sleeping perfectly. We made sure everything was set aside for it. The nutrition was on point pretty much every single day, and nothing happened. So that's not good or bad. It's just, it is what it is. It's what happened. And so I would want to be totally honest as far as the results there. And going back to the volume thing, this isn't the first time I've experimented with higher volume. My left arm is about half an inch smaller than my right. So at one point I've done several left arm specialization phases, and at most maybe I get a little bit of inflammation. It catches up by 1/8 of an inch or something like that. And then the half an inch goes back to what it was. It's just always been that way. And all that extra volume hasn't done anything. I've mentioned an example before where I did Omar Isof's pull-up specialization routine. This was back in 2018. And at one point, I was doing over 30 sets per week for my back, mostly pull-ups, but other things as well. During this time, I had previously just strained my pec. So I was now doing 2 to 4 sets of chest per week. And yet when you looked at the actual numbers week to week, my chest was progressing just as fast as my back was. My strength on my incline bench was going up just as much as on my pull-ups and my rows, I think, at the time. So all of that to say that for me personally and many clients that I've trained, I do not see this benefit to much higher volumes. I would also point out that there are many, many people who have extremely impressive physiques on 3 days per week. I mean, obviously a lot of people know that when starting, some people recommend full body 3 times a week. You've got routines like Bill Starr's 5x5, a lot of these like starting strength 3 days a week. But then even more advanced from there, you have like something like Max OT 3 days a week. But then you have fully advanced people. Jeff Alberts is a great example. He is like 30 plus years into this, and he's still doing 3 days per week with low to moderate volume. He's just, he's very concentrated on it. He talks about the intent of it. And it's something that he's done for a long time. And he's even experimented with the higher volume. Didn't find too much from it. The entire camp of DC training has hundreds, if not thousands of people who have shown extremely impressive physiques from 3 days a week. Skip from Intense Muscle, 3 days a week. Fortitude Training had a 3 day a week option. There's a lot of people who have developed amazing physiques on 3 days per week. So I know that that is not the most evidence-based routine. And frankly, I don't always put clients on 3 days per week. I've had clients on 3, 4, 5, or 6 days per week most of the time. I mean, there's a huge range depending on the client's goals, desires, all that. But the point is, I just do not personally buy in that everybody has to have this higher volume. So what will I do going forward? I will be going back to 3 days per week on an upper lower split. I will probably be sticking with 6 to 10 sets per muscle group. So to me, it's one of those things where unless you really, really love the actual lifting, like you just love being in the gym, which is fine if you do, and you don't have that many other things to do with your time, then it's like, why would I work twice as many hours to make the same salary? Maybe if I just genuinely loved it, but probably not. I'd probably find some other things to do. And I really do enjoy the gym and I look forward to it a lot. But at 3 days per week, that's enough for me. Like I'm pretty good with 3 days per week, 2 days a week on cardio, and then 2 days to kind of just rest, relax, do whatever I want. From the higher volume, I've been having some low back, some hip issues, and maybe a little bit of shoulder issues. Some things that I just want to take some time, rehab them a little bit, and now I have time for that. I have time to make this video tonight because it's a Wednesday evening and I don't have to be working out for the next hour and a half. So to me, I am actually just looking forward to getting back to a more normal schedule for me. But I still want to be very clear that it wasn't that that's what's got in the way of anything. Steve would vouch for the fact that I put everything into this, that I was on point with the sleep, the routine, everything. It was just that after a while, it just started to be a little bit less enjoyable because of how much it was taking over from other things in my life. So guys, I hope you liked that video. It was a very long one, probably the longest solo video I've done because I had 6 months of notes to go over, right? There was a lot to talk about. I'm really glad I did the experiment because it got me to understand even more deeply this method of training with the ramping volume, with looking at pump, disruption, readiness, all of these factors. It got to give me more communication with Steve and learn more about why he does some of these things. So it was something that I enjoyed. And I'd be open to something in the future with working with another coach. If there's a specific coach you think it would be interesting to see me work with, post down below and maybe I will consider it. For now, I'm gonna do some more fun training, more of what I was doing before a little bit, and just kind of get back to a normal schedule for me. But again, after 18 years, it's nice to have something that makes it more fun. So if there's something that you think it would be interesting for me to try, certainly post down below and I will consider it. And Steve, can't thank you enough for the last 6 months. I appreciate all of your in-depth replies. It's been great to work with you, to see how you go about things. And as I mentioned, I would continue absolutely to discuss training with you. I know we're getting you back on soon. So that's probably a final thing to say. Steve will be coming on next week to discuss his thoughts on how our training went and all of that. But again, thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for listening and tuning in. Comment down below your thoughts on this experiment and things going forward. Subscribe for more from the channel, and I will see you guys next time.